Well, g'day. If you've already seen a previous video where I see how relatively easy it is to use the Army Painter's speed paints, with the question of, are these speed paints good for idiots? Good for people who are a bit lazy and just want to paint a lot of minis really quickly for a game. We saw my opinion that yes, indeed, they do seem to work very quickly. Not the most spectacular job, but again, if you don't know what you're doing, like me, then these speed paints are a good option. But obviously, they are in stark competition with another famous brand, Citadel contrast paints. Contrast paints, speed paints, what's the difference? That's the question. I'm having a look in this video. So basically what I'm going to do is I've got myself 6 of my little convict minis, and I'm going to try and quickly paint up 2 batches with only using the Citadel paints or only using the Army paints. And we're gonna have a look at which one's better, which one basically is fit for an idiot like myself. So Army paints or Citadel paints appropriate for an idiot? Let's find out. So a simple setup for a simple speed painter, just a matte undercoat. Didn't bother with Zenithal highlighting. I grabbed my selection of paints and I got shaking. So I started with this white contrast paint, I don't know, Angel Legion or something like that. And you might say, what's the point of having a white paint on little white minis? Well, I did find that it just gave them a nice coat to keep it all together. And it's more like a grey that lets a lot of white through, just giving that little bit of contrast, because that's the point, isn't it? The idea is I would give these things just one coat and I wouldn't even bother covering them in liquid talent later. Army Painter was up next with its pallid bone. I didn't have any white, so that's what I'd use for these guys' pants. And their famous rattle bottles, but we'll come back to that later. I actually really liked the sort of yellowy orangey colours in the Army Painter. I don't know, like famously yellow is really bad to go onto surfaces, but I find the Army Painter stuff seems to, I don't know, look really nice. Next up, I was using Citadel's Friar Slayer's Flesh, a bit odd, and I was expecting quite a darker skin tone, but in the end it was not nearly as dark as I thought it was. It was more like, I don't know, a sun-bronzed Aussie rather than someone with a darker skin tone. But, I didn't mind it, and you got it used anyway. Also using the little lippy bottles. I wasn't expecting to like the little lippy bottles from Citadel paints nearly as much as I ended up actually enjoying them. I've heard bad things about them, but I don't mind them as much. They certainly didn't cause as much trouble as the Rattler bottles will cause later. Yes, that is indeed foreshadowing. Okay, it was time for Crusader Skin, and this is where the droppy bottles cause grief. One squeeze and pop! The lid came right off. I had no idea what had gone wrong. In the end, I figured what happened is the little rattler ball, here it is here, if I can get it, had gotten jammed into the nozzle. Obviously, there wasn't any paint coming out because the rattle ball was in the nozzle. And so in the end, the pressure built up until finally the cap popped right off the end, spilling half the bottle across my palette. So look, this is a bit of a downside. Like, I know the rattle balls are in there to help mix it more speedily, and they are certainly a bunch of fun. But my goodness, like now I'm constantly paranoid that the bottle lids are going to pop off any moment now. So ironically, coming into this, I thought that the Army Painter's rattle bottles and the fact you can drop out and have that control would be much more appealing. But now I'm just scared I'm going to lose half my paint. And in the end, I know this might be a bit sacrilegious, I kind of like the Citadel lippy lids. But now, for those who think we're going to go all Citadel way, you're completely wrong. Because blue, this lovely sky blue, what is it called? One moment. It is Pilar Glacier, I don't know, but it's blue. Normally blue is a wonderful color to paint on, but I found this very light blue color was absolutely atrocious. All the pigment pooled very quickly down. In the end, it meant that like those large portions of the mini that really wasn't painted at all. I know it was meant to be like a highlight effect, but it was a little bit ridiculous. So yes, this light blue from Citadel paint, a bit rubbish. In the end, I just loaded up my paintbrush with as much pigment as I could and just painted it on as best I could. So yeah, not too keen on the light blue, that's for sure. Time for some Fire Giant Orange. And like I said, ooh, it paints on like a charm, that's for sure. So time for these little convicts jackets and a double header from the Army Painter. It was the High Lord Blue and the Orcskin Green. And as you're going to see, that Orcskin Green is quite vivid. I gotta be honest with you, it's so cartoony. I don't really like it all that much. In the end, as you'll see later on, we've got the Citadel camo paint. And at the moment, with anything that's orcish, I tend to use that instead. Next up is Citadel's legendary snakebite leather. Now I am a complete cheapskate and a complete idiot, remember that. So I was using a limited palette of browns. I'd end up using this not just for the leather, but also for like the axe head shaft, the wooden stock of the barrel. Pretty much wood and leather was having this snake leather treatment. But it does the job. It actually does look quite nice, either as leather or as timber. Though typically I wouldn't use them as both on the same model. So Army Painter's Brown would be hardened leather, and once again I'd use it both for wooden things and leather things. Yes, sorry, overused. It too functioned fairly well. Getting close to the end now with Citadel's Black Legion. Now, I discovered the trick with this stuff as I went. Ultimately with Black Legion, you can't put too much on all at once. If you do, it's basically just black paint. You want to make sure that your brush is fairly thin as you put it on. Sadly, I discovered too late, but you know, better late than never. So if you put it on nice and thin, it will show a bit of contrast with fabric in particular. I was mainly using it for these guys' hats and their boots. So, you know, dabbing it on and just having it as black wasn't the end of the world. Army Painter's starter set does not come with the black. So in the end, I used Gravelord Grey in a similar purpose. Again, this time intentionally overloading my brush in order to sort of give a darker effect. It's still grey. There's no question, even when you smat on a whole bunch of paint, it's still fairly grey. But anyway, that's fine. It still looks like a rough worn hat, which is okay for convicts. By the way, that's why I'm willing to do it to these guys. These aren't anything special. They're meant to look like rough, ragtag, scrappy dudes anyway. Okay, so finishing touches now. All these convicts have little bandanas to sort of unify them together. And for the contrast paints, they're getting Creed Camo, it's called. What a silly name. Again, the color's good for anything green, and again, particularly orcs. I like it better than the fluoro. It's a little bit darker. And yes, using it on their bandanas. The bandanas on both, all my convicts are either green or orange. It contrasts really well with the red coats they go against. Just that little touch to unite what is a very disparately uniformed group of rabble. And lastly, a little bit more Army Painter orange, just to wrap it all up. But of course, neither set comes with any metallics, either silver or gold. So I would just simply grab myself some game color metal to put a bit of silver on there, axe heads and barrels, and that would leave me with my miniatures more or less finished. So yes, here is the result. I'll jump to some images in a moment and talk about my conclusions. So here we are. This is the Armor Painter speed paints. This is these figures, and this is the end result. Again, I'm pretty happy with it, like I said before, but I've got to make a bit of a judgment as to whether the speed paints or the contrast paints were better. I don't have to, but I am going to anyway. And even though the speed painters were good, they are obviously cheaper. Their oranges and their yellows I really do like. But look, in the end, I actually, to my shock and horror, felt the Citadel paints were just that little bit better. Ultimately, if you're not mixing paints too much because you're too much of an idiot to do so, the little lippy bottles are actually a little more convenient than the droppy bottles. You get a constant amount, you know what you're getting, that kind of thing, and you're not going to get your lid pop off. But it's not just dumb things like the bottles themselves. It's also stuff like the way that the paints seem to run. And I had a discussion with a more skilled painter than myself, a friend of mine, and we both came to the same conclusion that we found that the Army Painter paint ran a little bit more likely. Like if you came past a bit that had already been painted with another bit of speed paint, it would reactivate the speed painter's paint and cause the previous section to run into the new section. Whereas the contrast paint seemed to be that once it had dried, it would stay dry, and you could more or less, not within limits, paint over the Citadel paint without it running into the next. So believe it or not, and I guess not overly unsurprisingly, considering what Games Workshop and Citadel Paint is going for, their demographic, in the end, if you were to ask me which paint I thought was best for an idiot, I do have to say it's probably Citadel paints. But anyway, that's just my opinion. What do you think? By all means, leave it in the comments. Any suggestions as how I can be a better painter, I'm more than happy to take and listen to. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully you'll see more of me again in the future. Goodbye.